Hello and welcome to this episode of Bellabeat Talks Wellness podcast. My name is Urška. I'm the co-founder of Bellabeat, and today we have a very special guest for you guys. Sara Adams McCarthy. She's a doula, a postpartum doula, a lactation specialist, and a certified nursing assistant, and so much more. And she's also one of the coaches in our Bellabeat Wellness Coach app. With her, we collaborated to create a very special 4-trimester program. So this is a program that helps women after pregnancy. So kind of not bounce back, but recover after birth, get to know how to take care of their newborn, and also take care of their mental and physical wellness. So welcome, Sara. Do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here speaking with you today, and congratulations to you. A mama to be. It's exciting to talk with you on this very personal subject as well. Yeah, so like you said, I have a passion for helping new families transition from a pregnancy into postpartum. So a little brief description of what a doula is. A doula is a non-medical advisor. It's a support for birth and for postpartum. And so basically what a doula does, depending on the role, birth or postpartum, I'm here to support the mother mainly. In postpartum is my focus, but with birth, it's supporting whatever the family needs, whether it's showing different options for the birthing room, whether it's support emotionally, physically, helping a mother to get into different positions, speaking with the medical staff on her behalf. Sometimes I say a good analogy is I'm the lawyer in the delivery room for you. So as I said, I can't medically advise. That's kind of our code. So I won't say skip the epidural and go with this. You know, I'll give options, and you and your partner make that decision together. And then I really fell in love with the postpartum end through personal experiences, but also in birth, sometimes things cannot be controlled, but in postpartum, there's much more control in developing and kind of finding your path to recovery. And so I kind of was drawn to that a little bit more. And I have a little bit of a unique story where I had my daughter, Sydney, when we were living abroad in Taiwan. And after that, I got to experience a postpartum recovery center for over a month. And then I have a birth of my son, Bowie, on the other side of the world, here in the United States, which was much different, just to say the least. And so I had been a doula before this. However, living this, the two dichotomies of having my children, I didn't even plan it that way. We were overseas for my husband's job, but it really opened my eyes to, wow, there are so many cultural differences in how societies welcome a baby and treat a new mother. Yeah. And those have been my greatest teachers. I'm also an infant expert. I've spent some time as a nanny, dabbling between different jobs here and there. And I found, especially here in the United States, we do need a lot more support and education in this department. So I just love what I do. And locally here, I work with mothers one-on-one and families. And so I have stopped going to births just because I have a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old, and that makes it kind of difficult to leave in the middle of the night. I do advise up until the delivery. And I highly recommend a woman to always go with having a doula if she can. And then on the postpartum end, I work with new families on their nutrition, their healing, their mental wellness, just kind of their coach and their guide through this kind of rocky roller coaster at times. And I also practice body work and something called belly binding, belly wrapping, to help a mother to restore her fire. So everything that I practice is restoring a woman's fire. And so a good analogy is the yin and the yang, if people have heard of that before. So Urška, when you're pregnant right now, your blood is doubling, you have a full womb, you're very lush and full, your hair, your skin is glowing. And then after you have your baby, you enter into something called a cold state. And a blood loss, empty womb. Some women experience some hair loss and all kinds of hormonal changes. And so as a doula, I focus on balancing that out and bringing that fire back to you. So.
Well, that was a really insightful introduction, and you touched on a lot of things like cultural differences, and most of us are only now hearing about the fourth trimester, but then in Eastern culture, this is a huge thing or part of the pregnancy process or recovering process. Whilst in the States and Europe, I think it's less known term, and it's only now becoming more known. But even when it comes to doula, I think as well, it's a little bit different between cultures. I think I see that it's much more kind of common to have a doula in the States, but here in Europe, we're not that familiar with hiring a doula, even though there's now more and more search for those kind of services or persons that can support new moms or pregnant moms in the process. So what would be like the right time to start looking for a doula, and how do you go about it? How do you check that people have the right credentials? What is actually the process of certifying as a doula?
So certifying as a doula, it's a training, so depending, and I've had both the birth and postpartum, and then there's quite an extensive end in the back end where you have to have real life experiences. You have to attend so many births. And on the postpartum end, you have to also work with so many clients. You have a mentor. So they really track that. And there's a few different organizations out there where you can become certified. I am certified through something called DONA, D-O-N-A International. As it sounds, they're an international doula organization. So you can always go to that website. You can look within your community, maybe starting with an OB, and say, do you have any midwives or doulas that you know of that you can work with, or just to have that personal reference. And kind of going back to where you said, this isn't as well known of a term, there was a doctor called Dr. Harvey Karp in 2002, and he actually coined the term the fourth trimester. So it's not that long ago that there was actually a word for describing something that a woman goes through. And what he found, he's also an author, and what he found is that a baby's brain stops growing for the delivery and to fit through the birth canal. But his theory, and there's a lot of science behind this, that a baby's brain is still developing for another 3 to 4 months after. He's still having a central growing. A woman is also going through so many changes as well. And so to kind of wrap people's head around that the baby as well as the mother still have essential medical growing needs, that they're not the best terms, but that they have these essential. So once a baby is born, Dr. Harvey Karp, his theories and the science behind it is that a baby and a mother are still going through essential changes. And right. So the term has really caught up steam, and there's momentum. And although Asia and Southeast Asia have done a really amazing job of focusing on the fourth trimester, even if that's not the term that they would use, there's a lot of traditions that have been around for hundreds, even thousands of years in supporting a new mother, a new baby, and a new family. I think that in our modern world, we kind of got away from that. Also in Europe and the United States, there were ways of helping the mother to heal. And it just kind of snowballed into this quicker, for a variety of different reasons, into, as you had said before, bouncing back quicker. And it could be
Right.
kind of survival, and they need to get back to work. There was no time to rest. And now that
And
there's more.
the support is kind of like limited to family, right? To close
Right.
circle of family members, like mother
Exactly.
or.
And so we also have shifted from a village society, where your family is right there, to a villageless society.
Mm.
So, people used to live in the same town, and now everyone's spread out. I mean, I know I'm spread out from where my sisters are, where my family is, and we want to see the world, and to be next to family and spending that much time with family isn't as common as it used to be. And
Yeah.
so I think, to come back to the village society, where we're all strong, independent women, we can do things on our own. But yet when it comes to having a baby, it's not in the DNA to do this on your own. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, it's quite difficult, and you're not meant to. So for women to have to take a step back and um, kind of be vulnerable and to ask for help and to look for help, I think is, people are hearing more and more about it. And the more that we talk about it, and with companies such as Bellabeat to share the education, I think is so essential.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting what you were talking about, with, the dispersion of the village. Myself as well, I don't live in the same country as my family anymore. And now I'm 35 weeks pregnant. And from a personal experience, I was planning to go through my pregnancy just with my partner, but then he had to travel a lot for work as well. And for a little while, I was left completely alone, in essentially a foreign city, even though I've been living there now for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I have many great, friends and, an amazing team. And I feel that in normal situations, I'm very supported. But when it comes to something that is, so intimate and also kind of, scary for a first time, mom to be, I felt completely alone. And that's why, I went back to be close to my family now at the end of my pregnancy, because I just feel like if there's an emergency, I can have so much more support. But I cannot imagine how I would feel if I wouldn't be able to do that, because I think your team as well, your medical team can only take you, so far. I mean, they're definitely there to take care of you, I guess physically, but mentally it's a completely different thing. And during pregnancy, so many things are, you go through so many changes that the mental part I feel is almost, harder than the physical part. And that obviously, I guess, also transcends into, the postpartum. I don't know. That's how I feel. It's going to be for me, right? So I guess a doula can also kind of be, a replacement, or like a birthing center or postpartum center can be a little bit of a replacement for that support that you can get from your family. Again, it's kind of like different from the mental perspective, but I guess, how do you connect with your patients so that you can substitute or supplement, the support they want from people that are closest to them?
Absolutely. That's a spot on connection that you made. So if someone is separated from their family, or, let's say that they don't have a partner and they're on the other side of the world from where their family could be, and that's where a doula or someone along the lines of a doula, can help with that. So doula is one of the major roles that a doula has, is emotional support. And sometimes we have to be a little bit sneaky about that, such as, for example, with my belly wrapping. So that's a way that I get in the door, to work with a mother. And then once I'm there, I can spend 5 hours talking with a new mother, about how she's doing. And we can go over so many different topics. But I kind of got my foot in with some tangible things, such as a tangible birth. So when you're having one of your first meetings with a doula, to look at a birth plan, um, you can touch base with how a woman is doing mentally. And what I like to do is, if she's not doing okay, maybe talk to her about some options, speaking with a therapist, or looking at women in her community, joining, some women's meetup groups, or, some local resources if there's, a library or a community center, and then you can kind of help direct her to those locations. Even if, let's say that she belongs to a yoga studio, for example, and they don't have prenatal yoga, maybe you can encourage her to talk to that studio, and maybe they can get some classes going, and there she'll meet other women, or, speaking with the hospital or the birthing center where she's going to be delivering, and seeing if there's a lot of them do have programs. It's a little bit harder to find these things though. And, I feel for women who don't have that background, because why would you? And it's a little bit of a needle in a haystack unless you have someone by your side saying, well, what about this? Have you thought about going to talk to a pelvic floor therapist? Have you thought about speaking with an acupuncturist? And the more people that you talk to, my biggest advice is to share how you're feeling, and so, or just sharing how you're feeling right now is helping women, and that you're not alone with sharing these feelings. So yeah, a doula can fill that role, and they can help advise. And if a woman doesn't have access to a doula, there's programs through the Leche League, which is Spanish for milk, and there's all these international organizations that are begging for you to reach out and ask for help, and they're all free. And a lot of them there's Postpartum Support International, which focuses on women's health. And, so if you are remote, you can go reach out to one of these organizations, and they can get you in touch with maybe in a virtual women's circle. And it's hard though. It's hard to kind of recognize how you're feeling and what you're going through. And a lot of women kind of miss their old self, and they do want to bounce back. And I don't love that term. I want women to step forward into their new self, because the old self is transforming along with your baby, and into more of an enlightened state, like kind of like a superhero. And I encourage women to kind of try to follow that path instead of clinging to the past a little bit. But it's hard. It's a struggle, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. No, I wish. So a lot of these things are, I feel, easier if you have time to, or if you're planning things in advance, if you're planning for pregnancy. For a lot of women like myself, this was a surprise pregnancy. So then I started to feel that things started to happen really, really fast. And, at some point you don't know where to turn. And as long as my medical care was covered, I'm fine. And I also, sought a lot of distraction or kind of stability in my work, which, you kind of like grasp to those things that are kind of also holding you back because like you said, you should be transitioning into your new self. You should be, changing, evolving. But if you're really scared or you feel that things are not under control, you might miss that opportunity because you're holding on to things that hold you back. So that's why I wanted to ask, like, when is it a good time to look for a doula? If you haven't been planning your pregnancy, or even better, when to start preparing for your pregnancy in terms of everything, like your mental state, your physical state, and then also logistics such as that. What will you need during the pregnancy?
Right. And you had asked me that before, and I guess I didn't answer. So in finding a doula and planning, the earlier the better. So I would say the earlier the better in trying to plan. For example, where I live, there are two amazing birth doulas that I always refer clients to, and they get booked out. So, you want to get on someone's schedule soon, even if you think, wow, I'm still like 7 months out, I would just start reaching out, and who knows what kind of advice that these doulas can share with you. And also, on your own, you can come up with a birth plan. So I can briefly talk about, what a birth plan is and how it can help you. And this is something that you can work on with your partner, with a doula, and to find, some ideas for a birth plan. There's a lot of resources on the internet for looking up what a birth plan is, and so basically, what I tell my clients is a birth plan is exactly as it sounds. It's a plan. It communicates your wishes and your goals for the birth, for labor and for delivery. And so this gets you kind of in the mindset to start thinking, where is this delivery going to happen? And a lot of facilities, birthing centers and hospitals offer tours. And so I usually encourage clients to go check out these facilities, and that can be very early on in your pregnancy. And you can look at a couple different options, and they want your business. They want you to go there and have your baby. And so this is kind of one of the first steps that I recommend. And also with this, you can have a lot of your questions answered about some things that might be scary or unknown, and kind of put your mind at ease here. And you don't have to have a doula to do that. So this could be kind of the missing bridge if you don't have someone helping you, is going to that facility, and also taking a look at, what are some of their policies. They might have some things written in the fine print that you're not okay with. Maybe, I don't know, maybe they don't have a NIC unit, which is an intensive care unit for a newborn. Unit is very important if there's, a premature, if there's complications. And in the town that I live in, we do not have one of those. And so you would get on a helicopter and you would fly to the closest city, which is not unheard of here. And so, that's something to think about. Wow, this hospital doesn't have a NIC unit. So to have some of these questions answered, this is what I like to do beforehand, so these aren't surprises. And, on the administrative end, you can at least kind of get to know the place that you're having the baby. And so also some of the hospitals, and this is a term coined by the WHO and UNICEF, there are baby-friendly hospitals, and a baby-friendly hospital encourages breastfeeding. Not to say that if your hospital doesn't have this certification that it's not friendly to babies. A baby-friendly hospital, your child is always rooming with you, so they don't take your baby away to a nursery. As
opposed to having a different room for the babies, right? And then they bring them in.
Right. So if you were at a hospital that is not baby friendly, that I don't like how that sounds, but if your hospital doesn't have that certification, then most likely you'll be able to send your baby to the nursery, which I kind of like a hybrid of these. And in a hospital, you don't have to send your baby away to the nursery. You can keep your baby with you the whole time if you want. Let's say that you had a cesarean or a traumatic birth and you really need to rest, even more so than a vaginal. Even though vaginal, that's no joke either. And so if you want to get some rest and you want to have peace of mind that your baby is in good hands while you take a nap, the baby can go to the nursery. So at a baby-friendly hospital, they like to keep the baby in the room because it encourages on-demand breastfeeding. And so that's kind of one of the main goals of a baby-friendly hospital. So, those are, once again, some questions to ask about the facility that you'll be going into. And my advice is that education, knowledge, and facts really matter. And, so being your own advocate in the medical system, it can really go a long way for you. And
when you say advocating for your health, for yourself as a patient, I think there's also kind of like a difference in cultures. I think in Europe, we're much more used to listening to our medical team and be led, or allow them to guide us without having too much opinion or say. So two questions about that. Like, how do you go about advocating for your health, for yourself as a patient? How do you shift that mindset where, yes, I do believe that the medical team knows best, but also I want my wishes, if possible, be respected? And then second, how do you plan in emergencies or unpredictable situations? Because obviously, even when you have a great birth plan, pregnancy is unpredictable. Your own health can shift in a second. Your baby's health can shift in a second. So how to have a good plan and have it communicated, but also when to allow for changes, or how to accept those changes. Because for me personally, my whole pregnancy was a roller coaster. It was nothing like I expected. I had to kind of accept that a lot of things are going to be different. Even now at the end, I was always planning for a vaginal birth, but now my baby is in 35 weeks. He's still in breech position. So my medical team thinks that my birth will most likely be a cesarean. So again, I had to completely reshift my perception of how my birth will be. But at least I have weeks to plan for that, so weeks to adjust. But for some mothers, it happens during the delivery, during labor, something happens, emergency happens, and you have to adjust to the new situation. So how do you plan that into your birth plan and prepare yourself mentally?
Right. That's a wonderful point. And, thank you for being so open with our listeners about what you're going through, because that's a lot. That's, it can be earth-shattering and joyful at the same time, but it's throwing you for a loop. And, for you to be able to share that and to process that is, I think, helps so many women to just talk and to share. And how you're able to pivot is also, it's also a testament. But, kind of going back to how do you plan for something like that, I always say, with a birth plan, then one of the number one rules is flexibility. And so, you can have your ideal birth, you can have your goals, that can be your plan A. And, kind of try your hardest to accomplish that. And then also, like, what can you for plan B? And so that's why I highly encourage this exercise of writing down a birth plan. And when you go to the hospital or birthing center, just share that with the staff. And so when you hand that to the head nurse, there could be multiple shift changes that are happening. And so instead of people coming back into the room and saying, are you ready for that epidural? Like, you'll say, well, no, if you could just check the birth plan again, so it kind of helps eliminate some stresses there. Right. And so I recommend that going to the head nurse, and then also having like your OB approve that plan, or a midwife, and kind of talk you through that plan and say, well, this doesn't actually make sense here. Or this is wonderful. But I know for a fact that hospital is not going to allow this to happen.
Right.
And so that's why kind of all this, information that we're sharing can go back to the birth plan and go back to touring facilities and finding out, do they have a NIC unit? Do they have capabilities for handling, life-threatening emergencies? And how do they handle those things if something goes sideways?
Why would you choose then a hospital that doesn't have a NIC unit, or that cannot handle?
It might not be an option. So, for example, where I live in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, we're a ski town. We're in the mountains. It's rural. It's more rural. I mean, we're a major destination. We're near Yellowstone National Park, but we don't have a NIC unit here. We have a smaller type of hospital. It's an amazing hospital, but we don't have that unit. and a NIC unit is the closest one is 2 hours away.
Right.
And I wish we had that, but sometimes a smaller town doesn't warrant having a NIC unit. There's a lot of costs involved with it, staffing, and if they can make it work with putting you on a helicopter or sending you somewhere, like the closest major city to me is Salt Lake City, and that's about 4.5 hours away. So it just, most major cities have that. So
Right.
it's just good to know before you go. And going back to trying to be flexible, I also have a personal story where when I had my daughter in Taiwan, I was at 42 weeks and they induced me. There's 3 reasons for an induction. The health of the mother is at risk, the health of the baby is at risk, and you're past 42 weeks, which I was. And it was amazing that my OB let me go that long without an induction. But once we started the induction, things just kind of, took on a waterfall of different complications, and I did end in a C-section. So that being said, when we moved back to the United States and I got pregnant with my son, I wanted to try for a vaginal birth after a cesarean, which is commonly referred to as a VBAC. And a couple doctors here locally said, oh, you don't want to do that. You've already had a C-section. There's a high likelihood that you're going to end in a C-section. Your C-section scar could burst, which was like terrifying to me to even think about that. And so I kind of took that advice. But then going back to being like your own advocate, I think that we are more similar to Europe than not, where you would go with and trust what your doctor is saying. And I always defer to medical opinions over mine. I don't want to be the smartest person in the room when someone's having a baby. So that's what I always defer to. However, I was told that's not allowed. We don't have a NIC unit here. Your C-section scar could burst. But when I looked into it on my own, and the reason I did that, just being my background and also my intuition, was I think I could do this. I think I can have a vaginal birth. And when I looked into the statistics of a scar tearing, which is a really traumatic birth, and the percentages were very minuscule of that happening versus having a C-section, where the percentages were much higher for complications, you name it, and lots of things that could happen.
C-section is a serious abdominal surgery, right?
It's a major surgery. So when I went to my OB and I kind of brought this up to her, and she said, "You're right. You're absolutely right." She said, "Now the hospital is not going to want you to do that." So I had to sign away papers. And a lot of this here, especially in the States, goes down to insurance and liability and who's going to sue who. And, so if I wasn't going to sue the hospital if something bad happened, they were okay with it. Now, here's a twist, going back to being flexible in your pregnancy. My water broke early at just under 37 weeks. And we went to the hospital, and my OB's there. And I said, okay, we're going to try for this VBAC. And turns out that my son was breech, and since my water had broke, they couldn't flip him, and they said it was very, very painful to even try. And so I actually ended in a second C-section. And at first I was upset. I was crying a little bit, and the more that I thought about it, I fought for that VBAC, and I fought for the kind of birth that I wanted. Not fought, it wasn't I wasn't arguing with people about this, but I followed my intuition. I followed my instincts of what I wanted as far as I could. And then I had to stop, and I had to pivot, and I had to deliver my son, and in a healthy way where I would live and he would live. 100 years ago, would I live? Probably not. So, so that's something that's kind of a personal story of being okay with something until medically you have to change. Yeah. So, whatever, emergency that could come up, whether it gives you time to plan, such as yours, or it's very quick and you have to make decisions. Just try to keep in mind the flexibility and kind of going through the process and the journey. And, when people say, as long as your baby's okay, that's all that matters. It makes me cringe a little bit because it's not all that matters. The health and the mental health of the mother and the partner is just as essential. So, people brush aside how a woman is feeling if they say, well, at least your baby's healthy. That's all that matters. Processing postpartum stress disorder of a traumatic birth, processing that something isn't as you envisioned is very real. And so I highly encourage women to process their birth story and kind of just keep talking about that.
Right.
Because if you keep things bottled up inside, it's not going to go anywhere. It's just going to kind of eat away at you. So, even just speaking with your partner of how they saw the delivery and how they felt during the delivery, or if you don't have a partner, if your friend or a family member are there, or a doula, kind of walking you through what happened to you, and don't let those feelings get brushed aside.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing this personal story. I think it's so valuable to understand where we're coming from what experiences, and it's incredibly valuable to talk about these things, like you said, because as I see it now, it doesn't come down just to managing your expectations, but also managing the whole process of transitioning when the emergency is happening. And this is where I see a lot of value of a doula or a trained companion, let's say, whether that's a partner or a family member, because I feel like when, things are not going great, obviously the medical team's priority is to keep everybody alive and safe, and, to end this process in successfully. And they might not have the bandwidth or energy or time to help you mentally, to help you support you, to support you mentally throughout that transition in that moment, right?
Right.
So that's where I see so much value of having a knowledgeable companion, whoever that might be. But obviously a trained doula might be the best.
Right. And so, when you're looking
right.
at exactly when you're looking at a birth plan, thinking of, are you okay with inductions? A common one here is called Pitocin. Are you okay with that? Are you okay with an epidural? And also asking your facility, how quickly can you get an epidural? There's no point throughout your delivery that they should say, oh, you're too far gone now, you can't get an epidural. The reason behind them saying no to an epidural if you're about to have your baby is because they can't bring someone in quick enough and get them set up and kind of disinfect your back, put multiple needles in. And so you might want to ask, like, should I want to have an epidural and I'm laboring, how much leadway time do you need to have? And so, just kind of knowing those things in your plan C, D, and F as like down here, or that's number one for you. Maybe you want to start with an epidural. No judgment of how you approach this. And if you want, I can kind of briefly talk about what will happen immediately after you have a baby.
I think, like, first it would be helpful to just understand in rough points, like what would a comprehensive birth plan include. So I guess like the pain relief, the preferred way of giving birth. What else?
Like you said, if you're okay to a medicated birth, or you would prefer an unmedicated birth, depending on what those medications are. Are you allowed, if you have to go into a surgery, is a family member or partner allowed to be in there with you? And if so, who would you like to be there? You can also, add in there, we'd like to have the lights down low. So when you come in our room, please don't like flick them open and on. And if you're laboring and you're doing okay, we'd like to have the lights down. We're going to bring in ask if music is allowed. The hospital here allows for flameless candles. And so a lot of women bring in these like light candles, and they bring in a playlist. and I wouldn't think that any facility would be opposed to that, but it's something to ask. Other things that can be in your birth plan are what happens after you have the baby. So, for example, maybe you want to delay the cord clamping, so you have more cord blood going to the baby. So some of these can kind of roll birth plan, but also the birth plan through delivery. And we're going to be banking some cord blood. We have decided to do placenta encapsulation, which is where the placenta is taken to a third party. They might do it at hospitals, certain birthing facilities if they have somebody. Usually it's an Eastern medical doctor who handles that, and they can dry the placenta. They can turn it into little capsules. I've seen it, and I've heard of people turning it into a powder, or kind of like a jerky. So some of these thoughts of what you'd like to happen. Now, for example, when I went into, I had an emergency C-section with my son, they wondered if I had an infection in the placenta. And so they needed to have that tested. So I didn't encapsulate. I didn't have someone to do that here. Some things to think about, like if you do go into an emergency birth, will they even let you have the placenta for that? And so the benefits of doing that with the placenta are healing benefits and recovery. And there's science behind that being amazing for a woman recovering. So, so you can talk about, medicated, unmedicated, who you'd like there. Some hospitals might have policies still where you can't have visitors with you in the delivery room. It's just one family member. So kind of look at that. My son was born during the peak of COVID. And so we weren't allowed to have, we had, our daughter was 2 at the time, 2.5, and she wasn't allowed to come at all to the hospital. And since I had a C-section, I was there for almost 5 days. Those are some things to add into your birth plan. And on a side note, here in the United States, there's a federal law that if you have a vaginal delivery, you're given 48 hours guaranteed in the hospital, unless you decide to leave sooner. And for a cesarean, you're given 96 hours. So, keep that in mind, and look into your insurance and see what they cover as well. And so a birth plan, it doesn't really get so far into the nitty gritty. It's almost kind of like a great path as well as a good exercise. And there could be some things that are not on your birth plan that come up. So,
right. So birth plan doesn't really include like technical stuff, the medical stuff, like your blood group, so it's more of a experience, what you want to experience.
I mean, they should have all the, the facility should handle that. Right. I mean, if you have the knowledge to get more, for example, your mom being a doctor and a specialist, maybe she can help you with that, and she can provide more details in that. But no, it doesn't have to get into stuff like that. Right. But it's not unheard of, and it's not a bad idea.
Yeah. You have the most important things just written down there as well. Right. And if I can ask that from your personal experience, what was the difference between experiencing your children's birth in the States versus in Taiwan? What were the major differences in the experience of it?
I think the overall feel between the two births was, in the United States, I felt kind of rushed. I actually had a nurse, unfortunately, say to me on day 2, "Why aren't you leaving?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And she said, "You're doing okay. You should be able to leave." And I said, "Well, I have 96 hours. And then I actually asked for the head nurse to come, and I talked to her, and she said, "You can stay as long as you need." women here are kind of rushed out of the hospital even quicker with the vaginal birth. So my experience in Taiwan, and it also has a lot to do with insurance and, just social services. And so when I was in Taiwan, I didn't feel rushed. They said, you can stay I was in the hospital there for a week, and they said, well, why don't you stay longer if you're still recovering? And I wanted to get to the postpartum recovery center. So I even felt like during my pregnancy in Taiwan, everywhere I went, people were so excited that I was pregnant. Strangers, not that if someone saw me pregnant here, they weren't opening a door for me, or some kind gesture. But I feel like almost over in Asia, it's such more of a family community feeling, and families are more together over there versus spread out here in the United States. So I felt that the whole process over there was more relaxed as far as, kind of seeing what your needs were. They weren't dictated by insurance. You got to get out at noon on the third day. I just felt, and so when I became pregnant over there, some of my friends said, well, did you book your postpartum recovery center? And I said, well, no, I was still deciding if we were going to go to Los Angeles, where I have family, and deliver there. And they said, well, you need to get on a wait list here because they're so popular. And in a small country like Taiwan, there's over 450 postpartum recovery centers. And how I usually kind of refer to them here is a baby spa, because some people here think that I checked into a postpartum depression hospital when I use the term postpartum. And once they know I was there because I simply had a baby, some of them are shocked, and they say, wow, you just went there because you had a baby. And I usually reply with, I can't think of a better reason. So a hospital is usually tied to a postpartum recovery center. And so I left my hospital and I went a few blocks, because it feels like there's postpartum centers every few blocks there. And we got into an amazing center. I got signed up with one in time. And there's wait lists for them. There's all different types of postpartum recovery centers in Taiwan. There's government subsidized ones, and there's very, very posh ones that are really expensive. Mm-hmm. So, and when I checked in with my husband and our daughter, you get a beautiful room, you get meals. It felt like there was something coming through my door every hour and a half, whether it's a cup of tea, a bone broth, a congee. The recovery is really important with food in the fourth mm-hmm. trimester as well, and what you eat and drink. Basically, what you want to ingest is the most healing with the least amount of work on your body. So I usually advise women to stay away from raw and cold. So when you have raw, which you think, well, maybe a salad's very healthy, which normally it is. But when you're having a salad, your body has to break down that raw material, and that can cause gas, and your body's churning to process those raw vegetables. And so it's taking away from the healing. So whatever you can have, like soups and stir fries and curries, very lush, warm, anything that you can make in a slow cooker, is kind of like the liquid gold of healing. And the more fat
it's also better, sorry, for the baby, right? Because of their digestion, if you're breastfeeding.
Right. Yeah. So with that's a little, so there's nothing medically shown that in food that you have that will directly affect your baby. So that's kind of a little bit of a myth, that if you have, for example, some people say if you have tomatoes or like raw garlic, or it's going to really affect your baby, and it's going to give your baby gas, and but you can't process the food like through your blood into your milk for the baby. And there's nothing. I'm a lactation specialist, and lactation consultants are on the same page with it too, that there's nothing that you need to avoid just because you had a baby and you're breastfeeding. And I can guarantee, yeah, so I can, there's a woman on the other side of the world from me that has spicy foods every day. And her baby is fine. And, that's not counting alcohol or drug use, things like that. And I also advise that if you're taking some medication and breastfeeding, to double check that medication and how it processes through your breast milk. But if you're having, something spicy or having, I try to tell women not to stress about it. And a lot of times it comes from patriarchs in a family, like maybe a grandmother or an aunt is saying, oh, you gotta avoid
the broccoli or something like that.
right.
Brussels
So
sprouts.
exactly. Yeah. So that's not really anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to have women not stress about that. So,
Okay.
yeah, so kind of jumping back into the food again, and there's more details, that we can share with listeners. We could spend an hour talking about nutrition, but the more fat that you can have after you have your baby, and it's kind of counterintuitive to, someone such as you and me, who probably exercise daily and watch what we eat and maybe have a lot of juices and salads and smoothies, and it's not on the postpartum end. The more fat that you can have, and I'm talking about good fat, it's like avocados and lush oils and nuts and things along that line, are really, those help your metabolism to balance more and your hormones. So one of
Right.
the perfect meals that I would recommend for you is a cup of bone broth. If you're, vegetarian, a vegetable broth with a dollop of butter or ghee, and stir it in, and just drink that. Or you can cook with it. You can cook with the bone broth. But the more fat that you have, the better for your milk, because your baby will suck nutrients out of you. So if you're on a diet, basically after you have your baby, and you're not having enough nutrients, then your baby will still get enough from the breast milk. So your baby will always be taken care of, but you will suffer. Like your nutrition and your healing will suffer. And so as a postpartum doula, I really focus on the mother too. And so, and avoiding cold as well, because that shocks your system. And, if you're going to have a smoothie, try to have it at room temperature. If you're going to have some nuts, make sure that they're kind of soaked in water overnight so that the shell is easy to process. If you're going to have some fruits on top of your oatmeal in the morning, try to, maybe stew some strawberries and top your oatmeal with the, kind of the heated strawberries. And, but that being said, if there's something that you want, by all means have that, delicious chocolate croissant, if that's what you want. This is rewarding yourself too. I usually advise women to follow this meal plan for at least 2 weeks, if not longer, just to help their body to kickstart healing.
Right. Well, I think like we shared a super important topic with our listeners, but before we wrap up this episode, I want to also invite our listeners that are listening or watching on different platforms to also potentially share resources for expectant mothers or for mothers in postpartum period in the comments or on our social media. I think we said so many times during this episode talking about these things, sharing experiences, sharing resources is so important for women and also partners to create healthy and beautiful future. And maybe we can end on this high note. I know that you already have 2 children. I'm very much looking forward to becoming a new mom, and I think it's only beautiful things can happen from here on. But just keeping an eye on ourselves in this process is important as well, because it will benefit not just for ourselves in long term, but also for our children, our families, and the future of, like you said before, society.
Exactly. And I ending on a high note, and I just want to remind our listeners that, when a woman's cup is empty, no one drinks from it. When there's a kink in the garden hose, there's no water flowing. And so the mother is the lifeline to the family. And so taking your health physically and mentally as a priority benefits your baby and it benefits the rest of your family.
Exactly. All right, Sara. So thank you so much for taking this invitation and having a conversation with us. This was so insightful, and I could talk to you for many more hours. I have so many questions still, but we can only talk about so much in one episode. So thank you so much again for coming.
It's been an honor.